any questions that you would like to bring up on that, feel free to just come up on stage when the opportunity is presented, or also drop the message in office Q&A as well. Anything else that any of you guys want to say?
Good evening. Good morning.
Hello. Hey, Azure. Very, very pumped at the fact that at how KIP 14 is like seeing all the responses on KIP 14 so far. Yeah, that's to me that's the most exciting thing. Since I woke up and seeing the results. Yeah. Kujo, are you like in East Denver right now?
Yeah. Yep.
How are things going there?
They're good for me. I just got in today, so it's been a travel day for me.
So, yeah, maybe what we can do is to, I think whatever we want to update, and whatever we want to publish through the KIPs, have already been, published, and we've been engaging here and there on different channels past few days. Why don't we try to get to some of the questions? If there's anyone who want to raise their hands up, are we good with that, team?
Yeah, I'm cool with answering some questions. I think, right now the biggest thing is, we got KIP 14 out there.
Let me see who else is live. There's Seth, so let me invite him.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? Is this a good time to ask a question?
Hey, Seth. Yes,
Yeah,
go ahead.
welcome up.
Hey, my first question is, what is the basis and what drives the decision to go from the current APY to 2,000% versus 1,000%? Kind of get into the nitty gritty. Kind of like discuss, like, have you run modeling, or like what's it based off? What, like the number 2,000 and the number 1,000? And can you get into that a little bit? And then I'll have more questions, but just start with that.
Yeah. So with with our current reward rate that we have, we're paying out quite a bit in rewards every day, and that's honestly that's not a huge problem because right now we've got around 4 months of runway, right? We got around 130 days. But the challenge is, and I think Policy's talked about this and done some modeling. When we launched back in October, we saw this explosive growth and bridging tons over onto Polygon, and with NCT launching, the thing that's really kind of backed this up for me, NCT launched last week, and it's just there's a certain amount of the nascent demand for refi. We're still in such a new space that you can kind of see that Klima is a main demand driver on these carbon assets on chain, and that puts a lot of pressure on Klima, both from a bonding perspective, to purchase these, and then any bonds that we issue introduce that further sell pressure, and in order to maintain the metrics as far as being able to continue to pay rewards out to stakers, all of that, if we're paying these really high reward rates, we've got to take in a lot more carbon, and it gets exponentially more, right? Because it's all compounding. So that's that's really the difference between the two differences. We're trying to kind of find the pace at which refi can build and gain some momentum. Recently there's been statements from both ICROA and the IETA about the space and kind of what's happening with the space that we're creating here, which is super exciting. But as we all know, the real world and TradFi moves much slower than anything that I know in Refi or DeFi to that extent. So we kind of set up and saw that kind of traditional DeFi explosive growth at the beginning, but it's really tapered off, and we want to make sure that Klima can still facilitate and be that center. That center enabler for the Refi ecosystem. And to do that, it's just this kind of aligns our timelines essentially with what we're seeing in terms of development, both with new bridges, new partners coming online into the space as well. With Flow, because now we've got Flow and Toucan and C3 apparently that are all coming online, but right now we've only got Toucan, and to help kind of the robustness of the space, we need to allow some time to have these other actors feel comfortable, releasing and launching their products. And Klima, can be a huge push to rush things or to push things along there, and we don't want to have that effect either too much. Does that make sense?
I think part of it makes sense, but I want to kind of rope you back in and bring you back to the primary thrust of the question, which was, what was the basis, or what is the thought basis of bringing the APY to the number 2,000 or to the number 1,000? You guys must have done something on the back end. Maybe you ran some modeling, or I just want to know why did you choose the number 2,000 or 1,000?
So just quickly, more often than not, the idea is also like, can people hear me? I know someone mentioned a few mic issues. So if like that's bad, I can also just message in the text other people speak.
I can tell you, I can hear you very well, very crisp.
Okay. So the idea normally is, how many months can we necessarily buy other carbon bridges to get set up, get tons on chain? And so, at least personally for me, the thought process for this, we normally play around with different numbers and see how does the runway change based on different APY values. But the idea was, in this situation, trying 5-6 months of very clear runway that doesn't cause, like, the runway would be longer than 5 or 6 months, but at least 5 or 6 months of clear runway where we don't necessarily have to worry at all about not being able to support that level of supply growth. And so 1,000 and 2,000 and 1,000 both give an adequate level of time, so 5 to 6 months, which is enough time for other bridges to get on board and get more time available.
Yeah, so that's a pretty good answer. I think that's kind of what I was looking for. Is it looks like you're looking at the runway, and that's your basis, and sort of in the context of where Refi, rather the growth of Refi is at the current phase. You guys are basically you're creating a sort of safe space. Now I want to also ask, and if anyone in the audience wants to come up, just let these folks know. I don't want to hog the entire time. But my next question was, what is it sort of in the beginning when you folks kind of invented this program, invented this project? You had a very, I guess you had the thought that Refi was going to exponentially grow, and now it's kind of in a different phase. It's the general Refi market it's clearly not fully constructed. It's in the beginning phases of it. How can you comment as to I don't want to call it a miscalculation, but can you comment just in terms of your experience in this realm, why there was that disconnect?
Yeah, I can kind of attempt that. I wasn't around in the super early days. I kind of popped in, after the LBP, and all of that. But I think, and we've seen this with a lot of Olympus forks. Like when the treasury kind of starts at nothing, it's pretty easy to grow at that super high rate, or it's easier to grow at that super high rate. And I think the hope there was that that growth would really spur that same kind of exponential growth to move over to Refi and kind of kickstart it and spark it. And I think to some extent it did. And on the other hand, we've on the policy side, on the policy team, we're in a completely new space that we don't have a ton of data to draw off of, right? Other people launching, potential own forks or some other projects, they've got the base of DeFi to look at and to trace some data to model from. I know for me that was one of the biggest frustrations and challenges, was trying to come up with decent, realistic data to look at when we were looking at things like supply growth and runway and what to set. I wasn't involved with the price setting for the LBP, but clearly there was a whole lot of demand in excess during that, and there was a whole lot of demand in excess, and so we took that into account when we launched, and there was a whole lot of excess demand. And so we're just, me personally, I'm just trying to take, the new data that we actually have now, which is amazing, thankfully, to have some data to back things up and see what's been going on with this space, and try to, model out from there rather than, make a super educated guess, if that makes sense. And I'm not trying to beat around the question.
No.
I'm pretty tired. I'm honestly pretty tired.
I like the answer, but I don't mean, as I'm asking all these questions, I'm not trying to discourage you. The fact that Klima did not immediately cause a massive exponential growth in blockchain carbon assets. I think I think we're in the very beginning. I think we're in the preliminary aspect of all this. Basically, I think what happened is you guys basically had an offering. There was a lot of demand. Now the initial investors sold, or someone sold a lot. Going to that aspect of it, were you able to do any kind of analysis that showed whether or not this sell-off, did it start with a whale? Did it start with the whale with multiple wallets? Or do you think it was numerous kind of retail investors that just decided to sell? Did you conduct any kind of analysis to see who's selling? Did you do any kind of analysis to see, because the people in DGen, the people in DeFi, they had Olympus to play with. So they very well know that, hey, I'm going to buy OHM, I'm going to buy Klima, I'm going to stake it. When bonds are favorable, I'm going to sell it and bond it and make that extra 2%. They love that game. They love that play. Did you do an analysis to see how often that occurs? And if so, then the pursuant question is, do we need to find a way to reward people who are staking versus people who are staking, unstaking, bonding, staking, and continuing that game? So start with the first part of that question, which is, did you do an analysis in regards to the general sell-off? And then go to the second part of the question.
Yeah, so I've done an analysis on the bonding side, right, to see how much of the bonding revenue is a 4-4 versus just new people buying in. And realistically, 60-70% of the bond revenue, depending on the week, is just people doing exactly what you said, unstaking, selling, and getting a bond at a percentage rate that person, that collective is comfortable taking on. The follow-up to that is
So I'm just gonna interject real quick. So
Yeah.
you're saying that about 50 to 60% is people doing the whole unstaking, buying, bonding, staking.
and that's where my clarification is. I never really added the
But it's
tieback
it's
to
a real
total sales, right?
it's a strong number. It's a whole number, basically.
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead.
Which and I'll preface that with, when policy debates, BCVs and bond capacities, we assume, right, that all bonded Klima is going to be sold. That's just kind of the assumption that happens when we have these discussions, as far as what to set on the different bond types. So that's something that we're aware of as well, as far as the sell pressure that comes with the bonds, and that's really whether people are selling it to bond back in for more Klima, or if they're just buying in, and bonding based on their price, the price change to discount to sell later to try and get a better deal than if they just staked. So we do take that into account as well when we talk about these things. So that's not necessarily a huge surprise, if that makes sense. If that it's as far as on the bonding side, that a lot of the bonds that are sold get sold back in to become more bonds, and that's kind of that's where Brian had mentioned recycling our treasury. That's what he's talking about on that front.
Yeah. So so it sounds like a question we have to ask ourselves, and that policymakers have to ask, and that all of us have to ask is, sure, do what we need to do for the APY, but more importantly, for people who are truly, staking, we call it 3-3. For the people who are truly doing 3-3, are we going to basically implement a differential APY for them where we reward, I'll call them super stakers? I mean, that's something that we have to discuss, and I'm wondering if the folks up here on the panel, if you guys agree, disagree, or if you have comment on that. There has to be a way. We don't have to punish people who are doing the, selling Klima and buying bonds. They can certainly maintain a certain APY, but the people who are super staking, is there a discussion to concurrently with the APY decrease, implement something so that, it just a differential APY. Like if we agree to decrease APY to 1,000, people who are super staking should perhaps have a 1,200% APY, and then people who want to do the bonding thing and play that game have like a 500% APY. I think that's something you guys on the policy side have to discuss and have to present to the Klima community. Thoughts on that?
No, I totally agree with that. Me personally, the other guys up here could speak to their opinions. I don't know if you saw the amazing and awesome thread that cheese.eth did over this last week on Twitter. He laid out quite a few good points, basically about what you're talking about in terms of incentivizing a longer term kind of locked staking. And I know that's something that everybody else in the community has brought up on the policy forum as well. So that's something I definitely want to discuss and bring up as an additional mechanic. And at the end of the day, Klima, we've utilized the Olympus mechanics to bootstrap this whole kind of refi space on Polygon. But at the end of the day, we're not Olympus, right? It's like we've kind of got to find our own path. And and possibly some different mechanics as well to look at how we can benefit everybody, and everybody can really 3-3 and benefit at the end of the day. So yeah, I'm definitely wanting to discuss that and bring results of that discussion back to the community.
So then, can the other folks kind of just comment on that and their views on it, from King Arthur to Heiser to Azure? I want to hear your opinions.
Yeah. So, in my personal opinion, one of the things that we are actively discussing in our team is V2 version of bots. That's also originated from Olympus. That's something that we are discussing, and things are basically being worked on the background, because how bonds V2 work. If any of us are familiar with the Olympus system, is that they basically essentially work very similarly to lock staking. Basically, once you buy a bond, it would actually only vest at the end of the term. Say, for example, 7-day bond, 14-day bond, 30-day bond, or a 60-day bond. So during the process, as the native token, if we actually apply to our protocol, that would be Klima, would actually be vested in the background but not credited to the user until the end of the bonding term. So that minimizes a lot of sell pressure, and basically you can actually see that it is effectively some sort of lock staking for the participators of the protocol. So that's one of the things. And would, if feasible, we might actually be able to do it in the medium term. In the very long term, the other proposal that's actually being actively developed, and I think it's something that's actually, personally for me, that's actually exciting to check out over the next few months, and within this year, would actually be internal bonds, also being proposed by Olympus. But that is, that one would actually have direct impact on stakers, and really, in my view, has the potential to actually level the playing field between like amongst all participators of the protocol. But I think that's really more applicable in the long term. So yeah, that's my 2 cents right there.
Yeah, similarly, so lock staking to reward stakers was also an early part of the Olympus model, and so the idea to reward people for not selling in any capacity, I think, is a good idea. It's just much tougher to do the earlier you are in the protocol. Like if we take Klima as a reference over the last few months, we've made various changes to supply expansion, adapting to the space as it presents itself. And so it's very difficult to implement what can become like a complex strategy such as lock staking when you don't find yourself with a guaranteed amount of long-term stability ahead of you. You could even like marginal changes when they compound over several months or over the span of a year, you will eventually find that they can make a big difference. And whether or not you can model accurately how that will change, just modeling supply expansion of just stakers would be difficult, but then the concept of super stakers could it adds another level of complexity. But I do want to see it implemented as soon as we think it is like a comfortable idea that we can follow up on.
Yeah, at the end of the day, whether you want to call it super stakers, locked staking, or long-term bonding, the idea is the same, right? You want to reward users for illiquidity, and that is the idea behind the Olympus Bond white paper, which policy is actively discussing.
Okay. I think that was helpful. It sounds like generally, at least the folks up here, and I suspect in policy, it has at least been discussed. and it's at least on your radar, which I think is positive. And I just had a few more questions, and I certainly don't mean to discourage anyone with my sort of austere way of asking questions. I mean, this entire project is PhD thesis level, and I want to approach it with as much professionalism and seriousness and gravity as possible. So I certainly applaud you folks for answering with the same level of seriousness. Now, my next question is, we're kind of going into hibernation mode. We're going to decrease the APY to kind of parallel the growth of DeFi or Refi, at least until things kickstart again. Now, from your standpoint, assuming more of these carbon asset on-chain projects come along, do you foresee the potential of increasing the APY again? I mean, is this something that is compatible with your policy view? Is that something that could occur? All of a sudden, we need to increase the supply of Klima. You would increase the APY. Is that a possibility? Because I mean, the whole point is to on-chain and onboard all these carbon assets. So any comments on that?
Yeah, I think I can take a stab at this. Definitely. I'm sorry, because I just saw someone with the comment that my mic has like some issue. Is this better now for you guys?
Yeah, it is crisp. You can go ahead.
Okay. So yeah, to your question, I think that's definitely an option. It's not something that we rule out completely, but something that definitely the community. I mean, the forum is always open. If let's say we are at a much healthier state, let's say at the end of the year, and that's something that community feels is something that makes sense for us to do. We always have the forum open for proposals, even from the community, and see how we can actually take it from there. But I just want to point out to one of the words that was mentioned by Youssef. I mean, it's not wrong, but not entirely accurate either when you mention we are in hibernation mode, in the sense that, I mean, hibernation might actually be construed as, we are lowering the APY and then we'll just wait and see. But just to give you a bit more color in terms of what's happening in the background in the rest of the DAO is that, yes, the current proposal is what's proposed by the policy team, but in the background, nothing has really stopped in terms of like the partnerships, marketing, as well as creative and all the other departments. But especially during this time, partnerships is still actively pushing and sourcing for new partners to actually come online. Active discussions are going. I mean, most of us on the stage, we might not be in the DAO contributor server, but I see all the partnership discussions going on every single day. And I feel that in the long term, that's really what's going to, bring us and scale us along with the Refi ecosystem. And basically, that's not exactly the hibernation mode. As we can see, it's really more of we are scaling back the token inflation at the moment. But as for real world that's really going on in the background, that has not even been scaled down. In fact, I think with the recent discussions and things like that, it's only been really up only, in my opinion. Yeah.
No, I'll add a little bit on as far as like, increasing rewards. I'm not. I like to look at the data and and analyze the data and see what's happening and what we can do and what's best for everybody. One of the other challenges we've got that's a little different from these other protocols is right now the only thing to really do with BCT is to hold it, or you can borrow against it in a market pool. There's not, a huge plethora of options, right? Whereas with stables, you can throw them into Aave, you can earn a little bit of interest, you can do all sorts of other stuff. You can, come in some stable coins, you can do all, you can throw some collateral, make some stable coins. There's, a bunch of other utility that exists for some of the other DeFi Legos, essentially. And we're just starting to build out some of those Legos. I'm personally excited to see what pops up and what we can do with Carbon. The fact that you can borrow against Carbon is pretty astounding, even today. So as those new products come online, those can potentially become additional revenue streams for the treasury, which could allow us to sustain a higher APY with that revenue as well. So I think that's part of the other challenge I think right now is that we're really we're really building out kind of the base building blocks as well. So as those come online, we're looking at having a retirement tool that where Klima can kind of aggregate all these different Moss, Toucan, Flow, like that's kind of the goal. Aggregate all that together, and the treasury can earn a little bit of that Carbon asset you're retiring, as compensation. Those would be other kind of revenue streams that would let us kind of maintain a higher APY, and provide those additional rewards and share that back with the community as well.
Okay. Yeah. No. That was helpful. My next question is: right now, in its current state, with regards to Klima, does it have any applications? And I'll get to why I'm asking this. Let's say, and I've been talking to some folks in your team. Let's say I'm invested in some energy project in the U.S. Via stocks, equities, and I think perhaps if they could buy carbon credits, it would help expedite their development. And let's say I wanted to contact the investor relations department and say, hey, have you guys heard of Klima? Is it right now? Is this a utility that an energy company, is this something they could use right now and say, hey, we bought this much Klima. It is tantamount to this many carbon assets. Here you go. Because for example, this company recently paid $30 million to do a reforestation project. Could they have saved money if they bought Klima instead? As in, can they go to whatever forum they need to go to say we are ESG compatible, we are our project, sure it's a natural gas project, but we bought the proper equivalent of carbon assets. The question is Klima currently in its current state usable for such a task?
I mean, frankly, no, not right now. And that's just because we're small enough, right? If somebody wanted to come in and buy $30 million worth of Klima, that doesn't exist in the LP pool. Right? So, and that's part of why we're trying to expand out, expand the supply and get that out with the, still the higher 1,000, 2,000% APY, just to expand that supply and create that wealth, or create that, that opportunity for companies like that to come in. Because ideally, kind of how I see it, that you've described the ultimate end goal. Except instead of having to buy Klima and just hold it, the way the carbon offsetting goes, you'd actually retire it. So what that company could do is they'd buy some Klima and use that as a hedge, because they could always trade against different various types of carbon that have made it on chain. down the road, and they could pick what they needed, and retire those tons that way. Like where I see, like, yeah, that's where I want to see Klima, and that's kind of where, when we talk about, Klima being the center of things, a company or somebody could just, purchase Klima and hold it, and then they could, and that's basically Klima Infinity, right?
Pardon my interjection, like, why would this energy company not just go on Coinbase and buy a ton of Moss, for example?
Right. Yeah. And a lot of that comes down to liquidity and the availability, right? And that's I think, a big part of that's why there's a lot of OTC deals. And I'm not a carbon expert. I'll preface that. But there's not a ton of readily available liquidity and depth that a big energy producer like that could just go out and market by $30 million and not get.
Let me
destroyed.
backtrack one more. Just let me just backtrack just a little bit. Sure, they could not buy $30 million worth of Klima, but let's do the thought experiment with they just buy $1 worth of Klima. Let's say they want to experiment and be like, let's see if the whatever the regulation sort of regime is, whatever the regulation, whatever the regulations are, they want to buy $1 of Klima. How would that work? So this energy company would buy $1 of Klima to then buy $1 worth of BCT, and then they would retire that BCT. Is that what you guys are kind of visualizing?
Yeah. Or, if they didn't, if they wanted to make sure it was a nature-based thing, they could do NCT or, the GNT that the Goddess is going to have.
And they would retire that asset.
Correct. Yep.
What was the thing? I thought at some point someone had mentioned the possibility of just putting kind of Klima on your balance sheet and saying, we've bought all this, hence this is the equivalent of carbon assets, hence, ESG, look at us, we are compatible with what you seek.
Can I jump
I mean,
in?
you can, and that's where I think kind of wish Dionysus or some of the other guys are here. I don't know. I haven't been as 100% clued in on the custody side, but when you think about it, you've got, if you buy Klima, the Treasury is going to guarantee that that it has at least 1 ton of carbon, right, for that Klima in the Treasury. It's basically holding on to it for you. So you can kind of think of it as a custody for future carbon, swapping out. Does that follow? Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I think that last part was very had oomph to it in that it's a custody solution. That's unique.
Yeah.
I mean, that's cool.
Yep.
Unique.
Guys, can I jump in for a second?
This
will
go
lead
ahead.
us out of this is getting a little bit away from policy here, so I thought I'd just jump up and can help answer this question because this will kind of come up. You'll see a lot more documentation coming out about your specific question set this week when we launch Klima Infinity. But just to give you kind of a sneak preview of kind of what that might look like for, let's say, this energy company you're talking about. So why would they offset with Klima? Why wouldn't they just go buy BCT and retire it, which they very well could? And the key is that Klima yields interest on the underlying carbon assets. And so, I mean, there's going to be two different types of organizations that are interacting. Let's just say there's going to be the ones that kind of have to retire frequently. They may choose to make retirements monthly. And so in that situation, you might imagine they would purchase enough Klima so that the rebases or the interest on the and the growth of the underlying carbon backing their initial investment is growing, so they can offset through some of the growth they've experienced. And if they lose their parity, let's just say with their carbon footprint, they can purchase additional Klima to renew that parity. Okay, so that's kind of one more active user of Klima Infinity, a more, let's just, not passive, but not retiring as often. Let's say someone says, okay, I've already met my obligation for 2022, but I'd like to invest in Klima so that I will be able to offset in 2023, perhaps a little bit easier, right? So I'm going to support this protocol by investing and staking in Klima. I'll earn yield. And then when it comes time for my retirement in 2023, it'll essentially cost me less, right? And you might say, well, is that cheating? Well, no, because you've invested in Klima, and by buying and staking Klima, you have helped us acquire more carbon tons. So that's had a net positive effect on climate action. So the key principle here is that Klima gives you interest on the underlying carbon assets, and it also provides because there's growth of the treasury, and it's strong because there is diversification with the treasury. But one other kind of more subtle point is that you gain governance power in Klima. And so if let's say you're a very forward thinking organization, you say, man, I would love to have like voting rights in the future carbon market to direct how the treasury is done. That might be worth something in the future, right? In the not too distant future, potentially. So, I think governance in Klima will become part of the valuation of Klima as well. And some people will want to build a stake for that purpose as well. So I'm going to step off now that Brian's up here and others and get back to policy.
Yeah. Go ahead, Craig.
Sorry, I just got into the call. Had a situation, but now now here. What topic are we on right now?
Well, we were just having a wide range of discussions. We had initially started with some of your policy proposals, including decreasing the APY to 2,000 and 1,000%, and we had kind of a pretty good discussion on some of these points. We're not anywhere in particular, so if you want to kind of take command of the discussion and take in a direction you want, I'll let you have at it.
And I've got to apologize, guys. I've got to drop off. Right now, I had fun. But I've got to hop off. So, Ryan, you take it away.
Will do. All right.
Thanks,
Napalm's up next.
I guess, Seth, if you wouldn't mind, because Napalm has actually been in queue on stage for quite some time now. So, Napalm, you can go ahead with the question. Also, Seth, if you still have any questions that you would like to ask Brian directly, maybe right after this, if there are no other persons that would actually like to come on stage, you are welcome to raise up your hand again. Napalm? Did we lose him? Hang on.
Now, can you hear me?
Yep. Can you
Yes, sir.
go ahead? Napalm, are you there? Napalm, do you want to try joining again? Because we can't hear you.
Yeah. While that's happening,
Yeah.
have you guys discussed the rationale, or like going this? I guess this was release mode. Have we have how long? Yeah, have we discussed the rationale for that?
Yeah.
Or you want me to?
Yeah, we touched on that in one of Seth's questions. We've all given our inputs, but yeah, please feel free, you know, to add
Yeah,
on.
I think honestly, first of all, I'm very appreciative of community, right? When I saw the KIP and I saw the votes, I was very, very happy that people are starting to understand what APY is. Personally, I don't think I've done the greatest explanation on what their work rate really means and really the concept of protocol itself, right? So I just want to take some time, talk with you guys, try to boil it down to the basics and give everyone a higher understanding of the protocol, right? So, with this treasury boot, we're doing what we're doing is, bootstrapping a treasury from zero, right? And in order to do that, you have to, what we're doing is doing this, a token sale, right? We're selling our Klima tokens for another asset of some value, in this case, base carbon tons, and, and into our treasury. And we use that to back more Klima tokens, right? Now, what bonding does, at a high level, is instead of setting a price for each Klima, for each base carbon ton, we let the market determine it, right? Using a bonding mechanism. It's a really cool, novel concept because you remove all kind of determination from the protocol itself to price these bonds, right? We kind of guide it with the BCBs, but we can't control it, right? The market will determine the discount, and the market determines, what is the cost of being a liquid for 5 days with opportunity cost, and we're just shown to the discount, right? And I think that's a very, like I said, it's a very unique feature, right? Now, what staking does, staking is a way for you guys to realize that profit, right? I've seen a lot of this comment of dilution, right? I do agree with dilution is a thing, but it's all relative as well. Like bonding gives dilution to stakers just as stakers give dilution to bonding, right? But they each have their own place in the protocol. Bonding gives this opportunity for the protocol to essentially acquire assets from the market trustlessly without determining the price itself and letting the market do it. And staking, one, it expands supply, right? Because that's the main, I guess, purpose of staking, to expand supply while, without influencing or the price too much, right? And we do that by distributing the rewards to the stakers, right? The stakers who are using, who are long-term stakers and long-term holders of the protocol, right? Because with the supply expansion we're trying to achieve, starting from around 250,000 to hundreds of millions, right? You need a supply sink that is mostly gonna stay unsold, right? Because if by not doing so, you kind of ruin the premium, right? And another thing it does is, one, it reduces the dilution from bonding, and two, provides opportunity cost for those who are holding naked Klima, right? Those two factors help in staking in order to achieve, this supply expansion we need. Now, I guess the quantity of APY determines on how fast or slow we want to grow the protocol. When we first started with day one, we didn't have a treasury to begin with, and now we've basically throughout the whole lifetime of this protocol, we acquired 85 or 90% of the whole base carbon tonnage, right? And that's great, right? But at the beginning of the protocol, we kind of had this mass acceleration of BCTs being ported into the market. We don't see that as prominent now as it did before. So, just like rationale, we have to lower the growth of the treasury, or not I want to say lower the growth of the treasury, or match the growth that we expect with the actual growth we see today, right? You can see, you see the BCT supply is kind of been sloping off, becoming linear, or not linear, sorry, logarithmic, and we have to adjust our growth to that. So this is why we're kind of reducing our, well, I guess a better way to say it is that we have to reduce bond capacity because there's not as much supply in the market, and because we have to reduce the bond capacity, we also have to reduce the staking emissions to keep them relatively in check, right? If you reduce emissions by 50% bonding wise and keep the stakers the same, you run into this problem where one, the stakers are getting too much reward for not the same risk, right? And that harms the early backers too, because the early users are the one who took the most risk, yet they aren't getting the same risk to reward. And then two, the metrics that you have today, just get harder and harder day by day. Exponential is, humans can't really comprehend exponential functions that as much as we should. So we have to be very conservative and have to be very proactive with these things to reduce it, right? And at a staking minimum, it's like this is the minimum, or this is our target treasury growth in a year, right? At 8,000% APY, that's around an 80x supply. So, and projecting to a 10x supply, that's a very fast paced, right? And there's a lot of pressure for the protocol to keep acquiring assets, right? If you saw a couple of weeks ago, there was a moment where we had a lot of BCT bonds, right? There was a lot of pressure on the protocol and the LP pool to keep, acquiring more BCTs. And it really didn't help anybody, right? It didn't help the stakers. It really didn't help the bonders. And honestly, it didn't help the treasury as much as we thought it would, right? But since then, we learned from that and, moved on to that. But the alternative to really not really fix it, but to really guide it towards the right direction we want is to kind of adjust our growth to the market, right? And there's more protocols coming today, right? When we first started, there was only Toucan with BCT. Now Toucan released another product, NCTs. Moss is very aligned with us. I love talking with them. C3 posted a RFC that I'm very interested to see how that goes along. And, and a variety of new bridges coming later too. So the market is small, but expanding very widely. In a span of 4 months, we've already had competitors. And we already have significant bridges coming in within 4 months. This is insane. This is nothing that occurs today in like traditional legacy markets, right? Like they don't just spin up a new carbon company and expect ROIs of this magnitude within months, right? So while it's still amazing, right, we still have to curb our expectations for growth for the short term. And this is our way to kind of even out, I guess, the curve here. Hello? Did I kind of just talk your ear out? That was a long monologue. I'm sorry about that, but
no worries. Thanks for that, Brian. Yeah. Maybe we can have Napalm back on. I think he's dying to ask his question.
Sorry about that. No, I got rug button.
Yeah, we
There
can
you
hear you now.
Phones.
there he is. Do you have a question, Napalm?
Oh no. Is he not destined to ask his question today?
Yeah. There was one thing I want to talk about. It's liquidity, right? So I guess the battleground that Olympus is playing and the battleground that Klima is playing are like, we use the same mechanisms, but our war zone is completely different, right? Not only like because we're doing Refi and they're doing decentralized finance, we're building from square zero, and they're building with DeFi already kind of flourishing, right? They just kind of amped it up to 12. So one of the things we have to do is kind of be agile in our development. So what I've noticed is that Olympus kind of has to do two big pools, or two big pools, the Ohm DAI pair and the Ohm ETH pair. The Ohm DAI pair, DAI is the most prominent DeFi stablecoin in DeFi other than USDC. So when you're starting with a protocol like that, you kind of have to have that pair, and then obviously when you're on L1, you use Ethereum, right? But for Klima, I kind of envision this new system where we don't have, the only big pool you would have is the Klima USDC pool, because that's that's our gateway to the fiat world. I kind of see this new network. I kind of imagine this whole, I guess, Web3 ecosystem where the natural currency of DeFi, it's one asset. I believe personally with its own, but it could be anything, right? And then Refi, our goal is for our reserve currency to be Klima, right? And the gateway between those two islands, is that Klima USDC pair. So that one has to be very, very, very thick and be able to facilitate these market operations, right? But for the other carbon pairs, we don't have to go as deep as we need to, right? We can keep, let's say 1/10 or 100th of the liquidity on each asset, right? And that makes it for, that makes us one, we're just more agile, right? Because when we have like huge weights on certain pools, it creates a dependence on them, right? By not lowering everything, but like by keeping them relatively smaller compared to like the fiat ramps or like other gateway ramps, you kind of establish a better independence from that, right? So what I think, and honestly, this was a problem more of the environment we were in, right? We only have one BCT, or we only had BCT as the asset we could acquire, but now we have, like I said before, NCT, GNC, MOS, UBO, and that's five. That's five more we can do today, right? So we just shift to. I'm thinking about shifting to a new, I guess, liquidity idea where we kind of bootstrap each pair, the carbon pair, up to a certain value, and we'll use certain KPIs to determine the adequate volume, right? I wouldn't say we will cancel it. We'll cancel the bond after we hit that KPI. We'll just lower it and keep it steadily increasing to match the whole increase in Refi instead of consistently making that the biggest pair. So then maybe like 1 week we focus on Klima BCT. Once that is established, where we have today, we shift to Klima MCO2. And then after that has been established with a large liquidity pair, we switch to Klima NCT or Klima GNT or Klima UBO MBO, right? And then what happens is now all the bonding pressure is just placed on the carbon asset itself rather than the Klima token itself, right? Because now you have that. Before we had that thick Klima USDC reserve always increasing, right? So in that case, you kind of offset the pressure of selling from that token to that one carbon pair, or I guess isolate it is a better term. You isolate it to that one carbon pair, right? And by doing that, I want to say avoid, right? Because that's not the term we're trying to deal for, but you defer it. You defer it and isolate to that one carbon token rather than the entire Klima ecosystem, which helps one, creates the independent price action from the other carbon assets, right? We'll be relative to them, of course, right? But we'll be an index of them, right? Because one of the issues that we've been facing since day one is that the price of Klima, or should I say like this? The price of Klima is correlated to the price of BCT, but we want it the other way. We want the price of BCT to be correlated with Klima, right? It's a slight dynamic change there, but by shifting your mentality to that, right, you kind of make Klima your base pair, and make Klima the base currency for carbon, which is what we want, right? It's kind of like the same thing with bonding, right? People often see it as you are buying Klima by BCT, but you want Klima to be a currency. You have to think of it as you are selling your BCTs for Klima, right? So those simple, I guess, philosophy changes, mental changes, shift that narrative towards Klima becoming a currency more. So that's what I'm trying to, just think about with the new liquidity shifts we're trying to achieve here.
Brian, can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah, what's up?
Well, first of all, thank you. I mean, you definitely have a very in-depth understanding of markets. I suspect you come from a quantitative analysis background. And so I suspect you're looking sort of at the calculus of markets. So my question to you is, the first one is, do you have a background in the carbon markets through, whatever background or experience? That's going to be the first question. And then the second is, are you able to kind of communicate your understanding and your calculus of market principles to the people on the team, and like, for example, the founders who have, as I understand, like a deep PhD background in carbon accounting? Are you guys able to kind of seamlessly communicate with one another your levels of expertise to optimize things for the Klima project?
Yeah, okay, so for the first question, small background in carbon markets. I did a little bit when I was studying. I did a little graduate study in carbon markets, right, or sustainability, right. So, but it's not as deep as the many carbon experts we have here. As for integrations, initially, honestly, when I was first discussing the end goal of Klima, right, it took a lot of discussing. It took a lot of discussion how to really collaborate our strengths together, right. These topics are very complex, right, and they're very hard, especially when you're trying to apply it to a whole new asset class. But now our communication is very smooth. I think we are very in line with what our goal should be for Klima now. Oh, actually, I want to talk to you or talk to everyone about like lock staking. So I wanted to.
Yeah, I think we would all love to hear that kind of from you, since you definitely set the tone of policy and you're a leader on policy. Yeah, and that was one of the initial questions, but I want to hear you discuss that regarding long-term locked staking. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm just happy.
No.
I express happiness that you were going to discuss it and take it away.
Yeah. So, yeah, actually, you, Steph, you brought a really good point that I wanted to express to everybody. Currently, like, Klima right now is kind of in this binary state. You are either staked or you're unstaked, right? Binary is good for the MVP, but the real issue is that you can't differentiate different levels of, like, I guess, the commitment to stake, right? The idea is that, in version 1, you kind of have this idea where the longer you stake, you compound more your rewards, and therefore you longer stakers get a quote unquote better return, right? But that's still a flat yield curve. And what you need to do is isolate each group of people, X amount of people that have different commitment levels of being staked, right? And you do that, with, fixed time, right? Bonds where you do one for like 1 week, or I guess you have lock staking for like, or I guess a mechanism where you are, insolvable for, let's say, a week, a month, 3 months, 6 months, a year, right? And by that, now you kind of have this new, I guess, view of the whole system where, you can see that X% is locked for a week, X%, Y% is locked for a month, Z% is locked for 3 months, and, et cetera, et cetera. And because we can see that, I think everyone can see that it's much more consistent, and you can see on everybody's level on what the general consensus of the market is, right? It's a lot of data that we don't have today because we don't have that locking mechanism, right? Or I guess when I say locking mechanism, is a mechanism to, not perform market operations based on current information, right? For example, if you knew that 90% of people were locked for a year, you would think, as a market external participant, you would think, okay, they're locked confident in the protocol, I should also lock in for a year. Contrary, on the vice versa, if everyone's locked up for a week or so, you can see that, or I guess a better example is that there's a large shift in stakers who lock in for a year versus they slowly shift to locking for a week. You can see that's very, there's not a long-term belief, and there's a lot more stability in the market, right? So this is really good information for us to do in the future. Well, I would like to do it, but it takes time, right? So the way to do it, I guess that way is nice for us to give us information, but then the other side of the question becomes at what APY would the market want to be locked for a year, right? Because we could just put a static increase per each, I guess, tranche from like 1 week, 3 weeks, yeah, et cetera, et cetera. But then you come into market inefficiencies because some people may value, 10 plus X% for locking for a year, or some people might be more risk or less risk averse and do 10 minus X% every year. So we need a way to actually control that too. And Olympus just wrote a paper detailing that via internal bonds, right? They're very much like zero interest bonds in real life, or I guess T bonds is better. It's an easier comparison. But essentially, you can deposit your Klima and get more clean, or get your X plus Y X Klima, or the original Klima plus X, depending on how long you stake, right? And what you can do is make that a tradable asset, a fixed income asset to trade with another pool that's just pooled with straight Klima, right? So you'll be illiquid for the entire time, but you can get out with a penalty, right? And I think that's a much more efficient and more dynamic system than the simple lock staking. So lock staking is like a band-aid solution, I feel, right? It solves the problem, but doesn't solve the true problem, right? Which honestly isn't the worst idea, right? Like if the demand needs it for the short term, then we can implement it. But I think we should strive for like long-term success and spend most of our resources on that front there, right? Because then you get to this really cool dynamic where the market itself sets like the yield curve on the protocol, right? And then what you have then is a bunch of arbitragers trying to arbitrage that yield curve, and the yield curve is guided by the protocol, or I guess the protocol levers that policy has today. But eventually we kind of want to go to this control system theory where the yield curve itself is determined by the market, where more demand in long term makes Klima release more long-term bonds, or short-term turbulence causes Klima to release more short-term bonds, and how the market regulate itself. And when the market regulates itself, then you have a really good system, because now you as a user, or you as a investor, can accurately predict what the protocol will do. If a user thinks there's gonna be like a housing crisis, or like I guess there's a climate crisis, and they believe that people won't stake anymore, they'll know the protocol will adjust bonds if necessary. And then what they can do is arbitrage the curve to expect that itself too. So you have this like layers upon layers of game theory dynamics that makes the protocol, I guess even more fun. I think we're doing this. Then we still, at the end of the day, we just kind of see this as an experiment still. Not like a child experiment, but a very grand old experiment that will adapt and evolve as we go on. But yeah, that's what I think about lock staking. It's a very good idea. Separating the people from like long-term stakers and then long-term stakers, but it just takes some time to implement it in the right way.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like there's there's stuff you have to do, and it sounds like
think about this
component to it too.
Like carbon markets can use this significantly because they can estimate the supply sink of carbon demand based on our bonds, right? But right now there's a very valid I guess critique against us is that policy team controls the BCBs, which that means like there's a centralization factor on how much demand we pull in, which is very fair. When we're making this system from day one, we kind of have these control aspects, but as we go on and do progressive decentralization, we like to make that automated, right? So once we have that automated system going, carbon market can see what the protocol is going to do. If there's a certain demand of Klima for like the next year, carbon markets can see that there's going to be huge demand carbon market and the carbon prices or carbon supply in a year, so they can use that as a method of financing. For example, they can mathematically prove that there'll be more demand on the market via the control theory, right? They'll see that, okay, since Klima is going to issue more bonds long term, it means there's a long-term prosperity in the carbon markets. And then like maybe a project could actually use that as a reason to, fund their projects. They can tell their investors, hey, because of this, carbon sink, you're going to need a lot more carbon assets to acquire. And then it's going to, with a supply shock with that, unless we provide a supply, expansion with carbon credits, it's going to moon. So maybe I shouldn't say moon because maybe the feds are hearing me, but the demand of carbon assets will go up, right? And they can essentially front run it almost, right? Front run that demand by acquiring assets today or by working with carbon producers to, supplement that demand, right? And then you can go even further, once Klima becomes stabilized and use Klima as the backbone of the financing, right? If Klima, or I guess the protocol itself sees this more demand in the future, and there's a individual or user, or a smart contract that says they can give the supply expansion, or they can facilitate the supply of carbon credits expansion, then Klima can actually fund it itself, right? Because it'll prove, it's guaranteed in a smart contract that you will require these carbon credits, So it's just delayed. It's a fixed income for a year, right? But because the bonds themselves are for a year, you don't actually need to back the actual tokens until you actually mint it, right? Which is at expiration. So you can do a lot. So these kind of stuff is really fascinating for me because,
So in regard to this pathway you're discussing, and it seems like in your mind there's an elaborate mechanism that makes all of this work. Have you is there a team of quantitative analysts, and have you guys done like an internal peer review? I mean, you're speaking with someone who doesn't have that kind of insight to the kind of calculus and to the engineering that's going on in your mind. I suspect, is there a team of quantitative analysts that have looked at this and said, hey, the math on this works. Theoretically, we could get this to fruition. We could successfully do this.
Yep. Yeah. So, we've been talking with some people, or like, Olympus, and I've been talking with them about the control theory aspect because it's very, I wouldn't say like sensitive, but it's a very big uptaking. Like, you taking a controls class, I'm sure someone in here has. You'll know how hard like dirt ore systems are to really control and keep stable, right? So let's say like there's some demand for long-term bonds. It's a question of,
I think for the audience, discuss sort of in the most kind of simple of terms what you mean when you say controls theory. I think everyone would be very interested in that. And I know I'm very interested to kind of gain some insight on that. Just talk about what is control theory in this kind of this complex mathematical vision that you have. I think people would love to hear that.
Yeah, okay. Let me give a TLDR and something like a 5. Okay, so essentially control theory is that you give a set of inputs and then you expect an output, right? And then by manipulating the variables, not manipulating, but like using the inputs, you design a system that will try to target the output, right? Because most of the time, in real life or in financial markets, there are obstacles in the way, or there are things that you have to do in order to get to target that, right? But you often miss the mark, and by using control theory, you kind of pinpoint a way to get to the inputs or to get to the output. So I guess an easier example is like, policy aims for X% of mints to come from bonding, right? Let's say like 10% or 20%, 25%, right? Sometimes we missed because our system right now is very MVP, like it's very like layer 1, just a proof of concept. Sometimes we overshoot it and we get 30% or 45%, or sometimes we undershoot it and get 10%, 20%, right? You want a system that accurately like shifts the capacity, instantaneously, like almost per block, like ideally, right? But there's a lot of friction we have today that we can't do that, right? So by implementing a PID system, so that's a control theory thingy, but yeah, just like a system that will accurately control the emissions of bonds and be predictable, right? Predictable in the sense that like you keep giving the same inputs and it'll give you the same outputs. And in that case, when it becomes predictable, people will understand the demand that comes with it on the other side. But yeah, essentially, like for PID or like for the control theory for bonds, right? Essentially, we want to ask when there's more demand of a bond, like for example, how long do we wait to execute a bond change or a capacity change? What's the magnitude of the capacity change? And then how long do we have or how fast? Yeah, how fast does it change? How much do you change? And how long does it take to change? Right, those three factors, all should be a factor in what controls the bond capacity, right? Right now we only have how much, right? And I guess to extent how fast, right? But it's not at the scale as we need today, right? And those inputs are very hard, right? It was kind of like almost controlling it by it's almost like playing God when a human interacts with it and by pulling levers, right? Pulling the levers ourselves. So we want this autonomous system that does the adjustment of capacity, independently and is trustless and open towards everybody, where they can see the mechanisms in place. And if they don't like it, right, they can present a better one, right, a more efficient, a more effective control mechanism that better exemplifies what we want, right? So I think that's what the end goal of Klima is trying to aim for. This is a long and lofty goal, right? But yeah, I think it's a very long way of saying like lock staking or like a way to acquire more assets by being illiquid is coming. It just takes time.
Very interesting. Thank you, Brian. And since you were on the topic of the prospective goal of Klima one day reaching maturity, in sort of the initial inception of the vision of this, is the reason Klima works at maturity to be able to give interest to Klima holders. For example, in 5 years, this thing reaches maturity. A big company, buys a certain amount of Klima, and they stake it. It derives interest. Is the reason this works ultimately because there is a backdrop of a market generating commissions that then serves as interest to people who stake?
Yeah, no, that's definitely one of it, right? And there's a lot of others too. Like this is like I think that one's more refi or I guess current market specific, but yeah, that one's a very good example on what can sustain this protocol once you get to maturity, right? I think autonomous market operations will also be a big factor in ensuring like this is stable, low but stable return that like kind of every market can use as a baseline for yield, right? Similar to what USDC does today, or I guess like many curve, yeah, we use curve yield is, right? The most common or the biggest yield curve right now is like 3 curve, right? Where you pair up 3 stable coins and right, and they trade with each other and it gives yield of around 3%. That 3% is the base yield for all of DeFi. When you for Klima, or I guess the car market, it'll be the same thing. Klima will provide this low APY, low but sustainable, driven by what the example you did, as well as autonomous market operations, and it'll be this new DeFi Lego. I feel like that allows other protocols to generate even more yield on that. That was another segue thought I wanted to go about on that. But yeah, when we reach maturity, I think Klima will be this asset where, or I guess it can be either an asset class, a hybrid between an asset class and currency, right? I don't think like personally discussing, like this is just my opinion. I don't even know if the protocol will, envision it will lend itself to be this way. But we might, instead of having billions in circulation, we might have like 100 millions and be like a higher, more leaning towards a asset class than what Olympus is trying to achieve, a pure currency. But that's okay because we have different goals. They're trying to make a whole new reserve asset for DeFi, and we're trying to do that as well. But it's also a focus on building the markets within Refi from scratch. And though they're very similar, there's slight differences and nuances from them that creates big ripple effects towards the end, right? And one of those ripple effects is supply. Sorry, I think there's a tangent there, but yeah, I think the yield will be sustained by many of those operations.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to seem like I'm, the dominant question bearer here, but I just wanted to thank you for your time. As I had mentioned before, I know I may sound a little austere in my questioning and interrogation, but that's just because I want to seek a greater understanding of everything and kind of really specifically pick at your mind and see what the reasoning for some of the decisions are. I'm going to step aside. I'm going to let you guys take it away. I'm going to let the Klima team take it away. And thank you guys so much for your time. Have a wonderful evening and look forward to many more of these.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to end actually, because we're doing another policy chat on Friday. And I try to not have another situation that will occur. So I'll be on there on time. But yeah, this is fun.
Yeah, Brian, before we end, shall we give Napalm like the chance of asking that one question?
Oh yeah, yes.
Do we have
Okay.
time for that?
Yes.
Napalm. He already typed rugged again. Okay,
Oh no.
let me just invite him up. Hopefully his mic works now.
There we go.
Yeah. Okay, take it
There we
away.
Yeah, I had a question here. So, from my understanding of Klima Infinity, for maybe like a corporation or organization that wants to stake and then automatically have a portion, could be 100% or less, go towards retirement automatically. Um, I am kind of wondering, how do we make it so that that doesn't then kind of cause a very large amount of boom and bust cycles within Klima? Just from kind of me thinking through the steps of where like there might be, large purchases of Klima at once, and then, consistent small amount of sell pressure from that point forward. Um, or are we not necessarily expecting a lot of corporations or organizations to be taking that um, option for retirement on, and a lot more would be kind of doing spot retirement, where they would just be purchasing that BCT, that Moss, maybe C3 in the future, and just the majority would be immediate retirement. Because I just have this feeling like it could cause kind of like boom and bust situations for Klima.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. Klima Affinity does have that effect where you have massive people, buying in and selling consistently over time. But one of the things I do like about it is that even though it does sell, right, and selling is selling pressure, right, and they're offsetting it, of course, but we have to kind of see it that they're providing sell pressure. One of the things that they provide that's very consistent is that we can be assured of that sell pressure, right? we can be assured of what's going to happen in the future. They're always going to offset X amount per year, so they're always going to unstake X% and sell for a year, right? That's stuff that we can kind of use as a baseline to kind of gauge our decisions in the short term, and eventually in the long term, going back to that control mechanism, that'll be an input as well. Guesstimating the amount of emissions that every corporation wants to do, and then put that into input as well. And the goal is kind of like since we're expecting that, we can mitigate against that already, right? If we are aware that they're going to sell 100,000 carbon tons, we can account for that and then adjust the BCVs as necessary. So I mean, boom or bust cycles are inevitable, right? Demand comes and goes, and while we try our best to mitigate it, and the goal is to kind of mitigate it, where we kind of lessen, or I guess flatten the boom, so then we can support the bust. There will still be that factor at play, but with the mechanism we have in place, or mechanism I'm just thinking about, we're gonna try to mitigate that as much as possible, because boom and bust cycles, how do I say, they're good. I mean, they accelerate the economy in some sense, but doesn't provide that stability you need for a currency, right? That's why asset classes should have these boom and bust cycles, right? But currency should have this or I guess currency, or people who are, or assets that people use as a unit of count. I think that's a better way to present it. We should try to mitigate this boom and bust and just keep it almost as a linear growth, not linear growth, like a consistent growth per year, and yeah, we're gonna try to mitigate that boom and bust by accounting for that with the BCBs and eventually with control mechanism there. But yeah, that's a very good point. They will create that boom and bust, but we'll try to mitigate it.
Oh, that's great to hear. Hey, thanks.
Yeah, I mean, stuff like that kind of stuff is very interesting, because you know it's gonna happen. It's I guess it's another theory with the every clean is backed by one BCT, right? It's a very good segue into that, right? The caveat, or I guess when people say one clean is backed by one BCT, or almost one backed by one DAI, the one thing we omit is that there's a time frame. There's a lack of time to notion on when we will back that BCT, right? And what that does is that you can use the treasury more efficiently, right? How do I say you owe $5 and you say you owe $5, and one day, or one day versus a year, right? Because even though if you're a long-term holder, you wouldn't mind being owed $5 a year, and because of that, the program can use that value elsewhere in time and generate even more value, right? Because we kind of have this assurance of backing, but not a time frame, we can exhibit these moments where we're not fully, I guess, we're at a state where we're under backing, like we are right now, and still process, because now that gives us time to kind of build back up, right? And you kind of have this situation where the user wants the protocol to pay back, or I guess, to pay back value, and the protocol wants to hold off until the last moment to pay back that value, right? And you kind of have this conflict between each other, right? That who's gonna best way to say it, who's gonna cave in first, right? And if KlimaDAO is the house, is the best way to put it. And by betting against the house, you may win sometimes, but you're eventually going to lose. So what you can do is side yourself with the house, and as long as you're here for the long term, you'll be assured that value, and you'll be sure that value you have in your asset, right? It's kind of like in the U.S. you have this FDIC insurance where every bank you're entitled to almost 200K of your bank balance, right, insured in case of a bank run. And what happens because of that is that even though every bank doesn't have 200K per account, to pay back in a bank run, just because you have that insurance, that prevents the bank run in the first place, right? So you have this dynamic where you can pay back the users with less value, with a portion of the actual value you need to pay back everybody. Because as long as you satisfy the 10% who actually will exhibit the backing mechanism, the 90% of users will never actually need to execute on that change itself. So that's just how you kind of have this fractional reserve banking, or there's a you can have this idea around here, you know.
Like what Zeus said once, don't fight the Fed.
Yeah, the Fed is very scary. So right enough like that.
But in context of carbon, we're the Fed, so we have to come in there strongly. No, that's great. Thanks, Brian.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, we're the Feds, but we're trustless and open, so that everybody knows what we're doing. So it's a good Fed. But yeah, I think that's a great way to call it off here. Kaiser, do you guys have any closing thoughts?
No, I think like I just want to give a shout out basically for the new website that just went live. Like to me, although it's just a front end, it's a pretty big deal just because maybe I'm, based on one person's experience, I see what's going on in the behind the scenes. Like the whole bunch of contributors that actually, when like all the effort that actually went into shipping the new website, despite all that's actually happened in the markets in the recent months, and like everyone just contributed without complaints. Like the website is one thing, but there are also other efforts that's actually going on behind the scenes as well. And I feel that the kind of attitude of contributors that we actually have in the contributor server really speaks volumes. And to me, it actually makes or break a protocol. So I'm very, very confident, very, very touched by all the responses, and I'm very sure like all the contributors that actually contributed to the website are very happy with all the responses so far. So I just want to give a shout out to everyone who actually gives so much support to our contributors, and also the contributors who actually did all it takes to actually ship it. So thank you guys.
Yeah, of course, and I'd like to emphasize we can't overstate how grateful we are for the community to be receptive to policy changes for the health of the protocol. And should you have any further questions about our decisions or anything, you know where to put them, and we will be keeping a lookout for those.
And more are coming. So on that, thank you, Brian. Thank you as well. Thanks, King Arthur and Kujo who came on earlier. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys.
See you again in the next one.
Yeah. See you Friday. Or I don't know. Maybe I'll just talk about more policy stuff. I don't want to keep on saying the same things. But yeah, we'll see Friday. All right. See you guys.